Hello, and welcome to Million Labs. Today we are going to talk about how to build responsively. When you build responsively, you build one application, and what is shown to the user varies depending on the screen size. We will be showing you how to build responsively using Bubble's new responsive engine. Let's get started. When you open a new page in Bubble, you will start with a blank canvas. You will need to create some page structure on that blank canvas in order for your designs to act responsively. For each individual page or reusable element you want to create, the first step will be to go to the Responsive tab in the Design tab and to switch to the new responsive editor. You will need to do this every time, otherwise you will still be building in Bubble's old engine, which follows different rules. The way to tell whether you are in the new or old system is to look beside the Responsive tab. If you see a blue circle with arrows, you are in the old system. Let's go ahead and click the Responsive tab now to switch to the new system. When we go into the Responsive tab, we can see the blue circle with the arrow, and we can see the option to upgrade Responsive Beta. We're going to go ahead and click on that. We will now get a screen saying that we can go ahead and make that change, but this cannot be undone. However, we can copy this page to retain a legacy backup. In the case of a new build, we don't have anything we're backing up, so we're not actually concerned. Let's go ahead and upgrade. When we click on the Responsive tab, we can see that we can preview our build in 4 sizes. So 320, 768, 992, and 1200. We can also move this arrow back and forth to see our application in different sizes. As we move this arrow, we can see that 846 pixels is the current size, but this size will change as we go up and down. Right now, the only thing we have on our page is the page itself. If we go ahead and click on the page, it will bring up the page's property editor. This is what the property editor looks like. It has an Appearance tab, a Layout tab, and a Conditional tab. If we click out of this section and go to the UI Builder, and we again click on that page, we can see that the exact same property editor has appeared. Each property editor will look different depending on which element or container it's for. The first thing you will need to do for a new application is to choose your page layout. In this case, we have chosen 960 pixel width and 3000 pixel height. You will also choose your container layout. You will always have the following 4 choices: fixed, align to parent, row, and column. If we choose fixed, then nothing moves and the page will not act responsively. So for instance, if we go over into the responsive element and we try and click on anything, nothing's going to happen. If we render this live, again, nothing's going to move because it's fixed. So if we want our page to be responsive and change according to screen size, we are going to have to make sure our page is one of these other 3 choices. Again, those are align to parent, row, and column. A page is a type of container. When we choose the layout for a page, we are choosing 2 things. Number 1, where an element will appear within that container. Number 2, where additional elements will appear after the first element is placed. The same rules we are about to talk about for page alignment will also apply to groups or repeating groups that are added to the page. For instance, if I set the page to column, then all new elements and containers would be added vertically. When I added group 1 first, it started at the top of the page. When I added group 2, it automatically positioned itself under group 1 vertically. When I added group 3, it automatically positioned itself under group 2. And when I added this text element, it automatically positioned itself under number 3. So you can think of this as one column, a column page, with rows going across. This column page made of rows could then be divided with additional types of containers, whether those containers were other layout types or had a repeating group instead. One other set of terminology you might hear is something being referred to as a parent and something else being referred to as a child. So essentially, anytime you have an outer element, it is the parent. So in this case, the page is acting like the parent, and the elements inside that group are the children. So in this case, group 1, 2, 3, and this text are all child elements of the parent page element. When we set our page to a row layout, new elements and containers will be added horizontally. So for instance, when I added group 1, it started on the left-hand side, and at the top, when I added group 2, it was added beside group 1. When I added group 3, it was added beside group 2. And when I added this text element, it was added beside group 3. Overall, you could think of the design on this page as one row with 4 columns. When you choose to have a page aligned to parent, you are actually getting a choice in a 9-point grid of where to place elements. So if we go ahead and click the child element, so in this case group 1, we can see what that grid looks like. It looks like this. So we can see I can place an item at the left corner, the center top, the right corner, the left side, the center, the right side, the left bottom, the center bottom, or the right bottom. So again, each time I place an element on this type of page, I get to choose exactly where I want something within the page. So in this case, when I added group 1, I chose this corner. When I added group 2, I chose this corner. When I added group 3, I chose this. And when I added the text element, I chose this placement. When we add rows and columns, elements will not overlap. However, if we use this option, they can overlap. So we will want to think carefully with design, whether we want this to be happening or not. And again, you will see that you probably end up combining the different layouts to get what you really want. Let's have a look at this behavior in the responsive tab. So when I am at a bigger responsive tab, 768, I see all of the tabs. Go down to 320, one went away. So where did it go? It actually got covered by group number 2. So with this particular type of element, this is the intentional behavior. So again, there may be instances where you use it, and there may be instances where you don't. When Bubble creates a new page, it will default to 960 pixel width. If you want to build only one application that can both shrink down to 320, which is the smallest iPhone size, or expand to a 1440 pixel desktop or larger, this is a good size to work in. You can also design an app that shrinks down to 320 pixels and expands to 1800 pixels or more if you build in 1200 pixels. There is no right or wrong size to build in. Rather, the key is to pick a size that is easily divisible. So for instance here, you can see that I have a 960 pixel page. That page can be broken into one group of 960, 2 groups of 480, 3 groups of 320, 4 groups of 240, 5 groups of 192, or 6 groups of 160 pixels. Additionally, if I want to break the page so that one kind of content is taking up 40% of the page and another is taking up 60, I can break it into one group of 384 pixels and another group of 576 pixels. If I want to break the page into a 25%, 75% split on a 960 pixel page, that is one group of 240 pixels and another group of 720 pixels. If I look at a 1200 pixel page like I have here, I can see that the math works out like this. I can divide the page into one group of 1200 pixels, 2 groups of 600 pixels, 3 groups of 400 pixels, 4 groups of 300 pixels, 5 groups of 240 pixels, and 6 groups of 200 pixels. I can also see that if I wanted to split the page so that 40% of the page was one type of content and 60% was another, I would have one group of 480 pixels and a second group of 720 pixels. If I wanted to split the content so I had a 25 to 75% split, I could have one group of 300 pixels and another group of 900 pixels in the same row. When we think of our page, we can think of a grid system. We can decide how many rows we want to have in a particular area, and then we can also decide how many columns we want to have. So for instance, we might have one section with one row where we have two columns, and one column is taking up 40%, and the second column is taking up 60%. And if we had a 1200 pixel page like the one we had here, then that one group would be 480 pixels, and the next group would be 720. So again, we want to think of our whole page as rows and columns in a grid system. If you are looking for inspiration as to how you should divide your page, you can check out other websites or apps. So for instance, here we have Airbnb. The first group we see is one big group. This would often also be referred to as a hero. If we were building in 960 pixels, this would be a 960 pixel group. If we were building in 1200, this would be a 1200 pixel group. We would have one row and one column. If we were scrolling down, if we look at the next section, we can see that we have 4 columns and 2 rows. So again, depending on whether we were building in 960 or 1200, the math would vary. If we were looking at a 1200 pixel build, each of these would be 300 pixels. Next, we can see a 4-column, 1-row group. Then we can see a 1-row, 1-column group. Then a 1-row, 3-column group. And we see a 1-row, 6-column group up here, followed by a, because this is very long, 15-row, 4-column group. Finally, in the footer section of the page, we can see a 1-row, 4-column group. In general, when you are using width, you typically put in the width you want. We'd like to point out, however, that there is one other setting for width, and that is called preset page width. Here you have the option to select custom. If you put in your own number, this will generally automatically be set to custom. Alternatively, you can set to full width. If you choose full width, your build will be in 1200 pixels, or you can choose centered, which will put your build in 980 pixels, or you can choose mobile. Bubble's default mobile is 380 pixels. When thinking about where your application will be used, if your intention is only to build a mobile app that goes into an app store, you could also just build only for mobile. As an example, if you wanted to account for the smallest mobile phone, which is the Apple iPhone SE, you might build in 320. If you wanted to build for larger screens, you might use 380 as suggested by Bubble. Now that we've finished discussing which width to build in, which height do you need? The good news is it's really up to you. You can basically start with whatever height you like, and you can add to the height as you build. The last decision you'll have to make for your page is how small you want the page to shrink down to. This is known as the minimum width. So for instance, Bubble's default minimum width for pages is 0 pixels. If you knew you wanted to build in 960 because you wanted to go down to 320 and then expand up to 1440, you might go ahead and put 320 as your minimum pixel width. Now that we have our page setup done, we are going to add a page layout to it. Before we add the page layout, however, we will create a new style to visualize the page layout more easily. So we will go over to Styles. We are going to create a new style called Wireframe, which we have already named. We will set our new style to have a background style of flat color, and then we will choose a color. In this case, we are going to choose a purple we don't think we'll use very often, and we are going to set the opacity to 10. Next, we are going to add a border just so that we can see it even more easily. Now we are going to add a group to our column page. So we'll go ahead and select group and we will drop it on the page. You will notice that the group snaps because the parent is a column. Automatically, in terms of layout, when we add a new group, you will see that Bubble tends to like to default to container layout of type fixed. Fixed, again, means that it is not responsive. So what are some of the other fixed settings we should know? Well, one, we can see that it has the option to be visible on page load, so we can either see the element or not see the element by checking here. We have an option to collapse this element when hidden. What collapse means is that if this is hidden, both the horizontal and vertical margins will all disappear as if this object was never here, pulling everything up and with it. Then we can see what the parent group is. So in this case, saying our parent group is a column. Then we have an option to do horizontal alignment. So we can click left, which it already is. We can click center, which we've just done, or we can align it right. With regard to horizontal alignment, this alignment is in relation to the parent group. So for instance, right now, we have group A aligned left relative to its parent group, which is the page. Right now, there's no other groups, so these aren't options. But if we did have more than one group available, we would have an option to rearrange them with these buttons. Then we can see the actual width and height. You can directly change the width and height of a fixed group by simply typing directly into the property editor. Finally, you will also notice that you can adjust the group's margins. In this case, we will add 20 pixels of margin. You will notice that margin is the space around a group. So in this case, 20 pixels of margin have been added between group A and the next element, which in this case is the page itself. To make this easier to visualize, we're going to go ahead and go over to Appearance, and we are going to change our style. We will select the wireframe style we just built. Now you can see the group more easily on the page. We know this group is going to be our group header, so we're going to go ahead and rename it. Next, in terms of a height, we know that we're going to want 80 pixels, and we aren't going to want any margin at the top, so we're going to take that away. But then we also know we don't want this to be a fixed group. So we're going to go ahead and change this. Now again, align to parent, row, and column are all responsive options. The way to decide which one you're going to use is to think about what you're going to put inside of that group. So what children you're going to put inside. In this case, we're going to add a row because we know that all of the elements we're going to put inside, we know that we want to add them horizontally each time. So first, let's have a look and see what is the same between the row property editor and the fixed. Well, we can see that both allow us to either show or hide a particular group by either checking or unchecking this element is visible on page load. We again can either collapse or not collapse the item itself by choosing or not choosing collapse when hidden. Again, we can see what the parent container type is. So again, the parent container type in this case is a column. Similar to the fixed group, I have the option with the row layout to align the group horizontally to the parent group. So again, I can see automatically I have the option of left align, center align, and right align. Again, also similar to the fixed group, when there is more than one group in the layout, I have the option to do some aligning choices. And the last similarity is margins. Again, I have the option to align top, bottom, left, right. Now let's talk about some of the differences with a row group versus a fixed group. So first of all, you will notice you have the ability to control both your width and your height. So you have the first option, which is to make the element fixed width, and you also have the option to make the element fixed height. So if we go ahead and select fixed height, we can choose just a single number. So here you can notice that now I have a fixed width of 212 pixels and a fixed height of 80 pixels. I have the option to choose just to have fixed height, or to just have fixed width, or to have neither of these as fixed width. You will notice that when I clicked off making the element fixed width, it also exposed one more option with our horizontal alignment choices. So now not only can I align left, center, and to the right, I can also do a horizontal stretch. We can now see that our group header has stretched all the way across the page, taking up all the room available to it. When we unchecked Make this element fixed width, some numbers were automatically put in by default into the minimum width and max width setting. For the minimum width, it was the number that was previously in the fixed group, so in this case 212. As far as the max width, the number by default is infinity. So in this case, we want to start thinking about what type of page we are building and how small we really want to shrink down to. In this particular case, we've decided we want to build so that the whole application can shrink down to 320. So we're actually going to make this 320 pixels so that this can shrink down to 320 pixels and then stop. On the maximum width side, when we have infinity, the group will just continue to grow and grow, taking up all the room that's available to it. So if the viewport, which is a fancy term for the screen size, is 1200 pixels, it would go up to 1200 pixels. If it was 1400 pixels, it would go up to 1400 and so forth. If we don't want the group to keep going, we can put in the number of pixels we want it to grow to. So for instance, if I was to put in 640 pixels, you can see that my header shrank to 640 pixels. Now this group is limited in size, where it will shrink down to 320 pixels and grow as big as 640 pixels. In this case, I know I want it to stretch to infinity, so I'm simply going to delete that. The same rules that apply to width also apply to height. So for instance, I can set a fixed height. To do so, I check that box. In this case, I would have 80 pixels. That height would stay the same no matter what. I also have the option to set a minimum height and a maximum height. So in this case, I have a minimum height of 80 pixels that will remain regardless of what's happening with the screen size. And I have a maximum height of infinity, meaning that the group can continue to stretch and stretch. The last option you have with regards to groups is fit height to content. This would actually probably make a little more sense if it said fit height to content or minimum height. So as you can see here, I have a group of 80 pixels with content inside. 80 pixels is always going to be larger than the content inside. So when the group is shrinking down to fit height, it's actually shrinking down to fit the height of this group or the minimum height. If I go ahead and make this minimum height less, in this case, we'll go ahead and make it 0, then I can see that it actually is in fact shrinking down to the content. If I go ahead and remove the content, I can actually see that my group becomes a line because it is at 0 height. So let's go back and put that at 80 pixels again. If fit height to content is unchecked, two things could happen. So first of all, let's say we decide that our maximum height is 500 pixels. When we click uncheck, then our group will grow up to 500 pixels. If we have infinity, then the group will grow to whatever remaining space there is in the parent group. So here we have no other groups, so it's stretching the whole way. If there were additional groups in here, it would stretch to meet those. The only caveat is if the other groups also are set to not have a fit height to content. So if this box is unchecked and those groups also have their max height set to infinity, then what will happen is the page will get divided evenly by the number of groups that have their max height set to infinity. To show you what we mean with that, we're quickly going to copy this group and paste it one more time. And then what we're going to do is we're going to click on the group. We're going to unfix fit height to content, but you will notice this is infinity max height. It stretches. And that one is now stretching all the way to the page. But when we do the same thing with this one, that stretches. And when we do this again, it stretches again. And now we can see that we have 3 uniform sections. One tricky thing to note with the fit height to content is that it will appear or not appear depending on the parent group. So for instance, if I have a parent group that is a column, fit height to content will be an option. if I have a parent group that is aligned to parent, I will also see fit height to content as an option. If my parent group is a row container, I will not have the fit height to content option. Instead, with a row parent, I will have a fit width to content option. Let's look at the property editor more to show you this. So as you can see again, our group header has a parent container type column, and of course, we could see that fit height to content. If we go ahead and change this, so we now have a row, and then we go and look at the group header, we can see that yes, in fact, there is no more fit height to content option, but there is a fit width to content option. So when we're using fit width to content, the same rules apply as if it was fit height to content, except now we are looking horizontally versus vertically. So if I have this selected and I have minimum width that's greater than 0, and I have content inside of it, when this button is checked, you're going to see that the group squeezes down to that pixel size. So in this case, this group is squeezing down to 320 pixels horizontally. If I go ahead and put 0 in, I can see that horizontally, I am now squeezing down to the inner content. Let's go ahead and put that back. Then if we plan on unchecking fit width to content, we can have two outcomes. First, let's go ahead and make the max width 500 pixels. What we can see is that when we uncheck that, this grows, but stops at 500 pixels. Alternatively, if we leave the max width at infinity, this group will stretch and take up as much room as it can within its parent container. Again, if there are other elements in its way, it won't be able to stretch as far. One other comment we'd like to make when it comes to width and height is not only can you choose to do it in pixels, but you can also choose to change any of these in percentages. So you can choose to change your minimum width, your maximum width, your minimum height, and your maximum height in either percentages or pixels. We prefer pixels at the moment, and the reason for that is they are slightly more accurate. For instance, if I wanted to make this group 320 pixels, no problem. I can put in 320 pixels. If I put in 33% of 960 is actually 316.8. So not terribly different, but still different. It's up to you. Whatever you're more comfortable in, feel free to build in either pixels or percentages.
One example where it may be easier to use percentages instead of pixels is if you are putting an image inside of a group. So for instance, here I have a group. That group has a minimum width of 280 pixels and it stretches to infinity. I want this image to remain proportional to the group. If I make the width 80% fixed, what that will mean is that the image will be 80% of the width of the group as it shrinks and expands. So for instance, here I have 1200 pixels, and if I go down, you can see that that is in fact happening. The image is maintaining 80% of the width of the container that it's inside.
Now let's talk about reordering elements. So our page again is of layout type column, and I have 3 rows on the page, row 1, 2, and 3. If I go ahead and select row 2, I can see that I have options to move it. So for instance, if I push next, it moves below row 3. If I push previous, it moves back into its previous position. If I push make first, it moves into the first position. And if I push make last, it moves into the last position. This ability to move elements around is a really nice option to easily move elements on the page. The last thing we're going to talk about in the row layout is the container alignment. To do that, we're going to add some containers into the group so that we can see what the behavior looks like. So for instance, let's go ahead and add a button. And next, let's add some text. And then let's add some more text. Actually, let's change this. So one option we have is actually to right click, and then we can go replace by another type. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and choose an icon and go replace. So what we essentially can see is that we've added 3 groups inside of a row container, and each of the groups was added horizontally. So one group, then the second group right beside it, and then the third group. So as you can see, I have gone ahead and restyled the elements, as well as repositioned them. Now let's have a look at the container alignment. So right now, all the elements are aligned to the left. If I click on center, all of the elements, so all of the child elements within the group, are aligned to center. If I click on the right, all 3 elements are aligned to the right. If I click on this button, you can see that it says space around. So in this case, each element is given space around the next element. So there's space between here, space between here, space between here, and space between here. The last option I have is space between. In this case, you can see that the elements are aligned to the left and the right. And again, here there's 20 pixels of margin. And then in the center with space between either side. So now let's take a moment to think about how this header and its child elements are going to act responsively. Remember, we want to shrink down to 320 pixels in this case. So as we can see, the header is going to shrink down to 320 pixels.
Now let's look at the inner elements. The sign up button is fixed and has 149 pixel width plus 20 pixels of margin. The text element is fixed and has 119 pixels of width. It also has 20 pixels of margin on either side. The burger menu icon is fixed and has 106 pixels of width. The border also has 1 pixel of width on either side. If I add up all these fixed elements, 149 plus 20 plus 119 plus 20 plus 20 plus 106 plus 1 plus 1, I get 436 pixels. Therefore, even though the space between the elements will shrink to 0, as the screen size shrinks down, the elements need at least 436 pixels to stay on the same row. When they shrink past this point, the element to the farthest right, which is the sign up button, will move below the other elements in the same row. This is called wrapping. So let's look at this behavior in the responsive tab. Here at 768, we can see everything is looking nice. And we said that when we get down to 436, below that it will have to wrap. So we're going down slowly. We are at 468, 442, and there. Even if you go up, so 435, I can see I'm wrapped, and then I'm not wrapped anymore. If I wanted these 3 elements to collectively shrink down to 320, I could consider changing their sizes so that they actually equal 320. But in this case, I like how they look, and I don't want to do that.
So what are my options then? Well, my option is actually to go ahead and use this collapse when hidden, and in this case, remove the sign up button. So what we will show you is before we move the sign up button and after. So let's go over to the responsive tab. So as you can see, we're in 320, not good. This is all smashed together. When we go to 768, things look pretty nice. And they continue to look pretty nice. So let's go back to the UI builder and let's click on that sign up button again. So if we go to layout, what we're going to say is that this element is visible in page load, but we are going to collapse when hidden. So we're going to go ahead and check that. Then we're going to go to the conditional tabs and we are going to add a new condition. A condition says do this when that happens. In this case, Bubble can give us some types of information we can work with. And one of the types of information it can give us is a current page width. Bubble knows what the current page width is, and it can make a change based on that. So in this case, we're going to say less than 400. So when the current page width is less than 400 pixels, what do we want it to do? Well, in this case, we're going to select this element is visible. And we are not going to check it. So essentially what that's saying is this element is going to be visible on page load, and it's going to be visible on page load until the current page width is less than 400 pixels. When it's less than 400 pixels, it will not be visible. So let's go back over to the responsive tab, and we can see voila, it's gone, and our elements look really good. So again, here we can see we see it, we see it, we see it. Still see all the elements, looks great. And then when we hit 320, that one element is hidden. And that's how we use collapse when hidden.
One other way for you to check how your app behaves responsively is to use a developer tool. Here, we are using Chrome developer tools. As you can see, I can automatically select from a number of different device types. So for instance, I could select an iPad. If you want to use Chrome developer tools, you can go to these three little dots, then click on More Tools, and then select Developer Tools. We have gone ahead and built Group Hero out, as well as the additional groups and elements within it. So let's have a look at how we've set up the different container layouts. So again, to start, we have Group Hero. Group Hero we've set as a row. We've stretched it horizontally to take up all of the page, and we've centered it. To this group, we've added an inner group. That inner group we have stretched vertically to take up all the room, and again have centered it. That group has then been divided into a left group and a right group. The left group is of type column and has a background image. The right group also is of type column. This time, though, we have added more text. So we have one text element here and a second text element here. When we go ahead and preview the page, we can see when we are on an iPad Pro, it looks like this. And when we are on a smaller phone, this shrinks down and wraps nicely. We have already talked about how conditionals can be used to hide something. So for instance, we used a conditional to hide the sign up button. Conditionals can also be used to modify something or replace something. So for instance, over here, I have Group Hero left image. And currently, it has 40 pixels to the left. If I want to change that left margin, I could use a conditional to do that. So for instance, I could say when the current page width is less than 680 to make the left margin 0 pixels. If I have a look to see what else I can change, I can see I have a lot of options. We are just going to highlight 2 for right now. So again, the one thing we want to highlight is margins. You can change any of them. You can change the left margin, the right margin, the top margin, the bottom margin. You can also change the background style and image. So for instance, if we want to change the background image, we can go ahead and click it. Then we can upload a new image. In this case, we've selected this other image. And now we can see what that looks like in responsive. So we can see as we change the page size, we replace the image. We've just talked about how we can conditionally change a group. We can also do that with other elements on the page. So for instance, if we look at this text, we could change this current text so that when the current page width was less than 400, we could actually change the words on the page. So for instance, we'll say goodbye. We see goodbye when we go down in size, versus hello when we go up in size. If we look at text, some other things we'd like to point out, again, you can change the margins and you can change both the font as well as the font size. You now understand the basics of how to build responsively in the new responsive engine. Congrats!